Dr. Fayemi, Dr. Chief Dele Momodu may not agree with you on a lot of things. And let me read out to you what Alhaji Atiku Abubakar said on today's Democracy Day. He did say it is not enough to declare, I'm quoting him now, it is not enough to declare June 12 a Democracy Day, and when the government of the day is disrespectful of the rule of law and wantonly disregard court orders, June 12 is at the soul of our democratic struggle, a threshold in our national life. For some of people who believe that this present government, the APC government, is not really in tune with the rule of law, does not obey rule of law. Those are some of the views of the critics of this government. How would you react to that?
Well, I am part of this government. I was a minister in the Buhari administration, and I don't know many Nigerians who have as much respect for the rule of law as the president of the country. That's not to say that everything that ought to happen by implementers and enforcers of the rule of law happen under his watch. We have seen unfortunate situations of women, for example, being picked up at nightclub inexplicably and abused by law enforcement agents in matters that are totally unacceptable in any decent democracy. And that is why government officials have taken that up seriously. In terms of whether what was done today was a complete recognition, if you listen carefully to President Buhari this morning, he said what he did was just a partial atonement for the injustices committed against Chief Abiola and several others who were at the forefront of the struggle, and against Nigerians, because Nigerians were also losers. They were victims in the annulment of that election. So the president never claimed that this one action would completely erase from our memory the cumulative injustices. And really, the June 12 injustice was probably the largest of all, but it was not the only injustice that Nigerians have experienced. And if you recall, I was technical advisor to the Oputa panel that came immediately after we returned to democracy in 1999. Many of the other injustices pointed out by the Oputa panel, and that the panel recommended that President Obasanjo must apologize to Nigerians on behalf of those who committed those atrocities, including military rule itself. It was a form of atrocity against Nigerians, in a certain sense, at least when human rights abuse is taken on board. The important point that people need to also acknowledge is that democracy is a journey. President Buhari is a product of his own generation. Yes, he was a military ruler. And he's already said it to people that he's a converted Democrat. If you recall his Chatham House speech in 2015, he made this clear to people and even apologized for whatever role he might have played when he was in the military in that speech. So for anyone to say, oh, it's not enough, of course it's not enough. We're not where Nigeria should be. Is this a perfect union? Absolutely not. Are we on the road to a perfect union? I'm convinced we are. But we have to keep working on it, because even in countries that have had democracy for over 2 centuries, they still talk about moving towards a more perfect union. So why shouldn't we do that? And there are things that we're not happy about as citizens of Nigeria that can be improved upon by our administration, and that Nigerians should tackle constitutional reform. But how do you blame President Buhari for constitutional reform? He doesn't have the powers to change the constitution of Nigeria. He could at best submit a proposal to the National Assembly. The Constitutional Reform Committee has consistently worked in the National Assembly since 1999. Yet we have not had any serious reform of our constitution. Well, we've had a few alterations, but really, we're still dealing with the constitution bequeathed to us by the military regime of General Abdulsalami Abubakar. So we're not there yet. We need a nuts and bolts reform of our constitution that would address some of the gaps we've noticed in the last 2 decades in order to accelerate development, particularly take Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is not justiciable. There are those of us in the human rights movement that believe that many of those things that we are doing through our social investment program in this government should become justiciable and should be something that Nigerians can sue their government for. If they don't provide free education up to a certain level, if they don't provide support for the weak and vulnerable in society, and if we don't improve on the growing of the economy in order for all Nigerians to partake in the process of development. But democracy is freedom. And I think we need to acknowledge that at a time there was that Nigerians were not even free to speak. Right. That we were running underground radios, that we were running guerrilla newspapers. And now, newspapers abuse President Buhari freely every day. They have there are several newspapers that you read, and you also have the social media. You know what is going on in that space. That has not been stopped in Nigeria. There are countries you go through in the world that you cannot access Google, that you cannot access social media. That's not Nigeria. And I think, I always say this, and I will keep repeating it. We must never let our search for the perfect become the enemy of the good. Nigeria is not where we want it to be, but Nigeria is not where it was years ago. And I think we need to give some credit to all those who have contributed to that process, not just President Buhari, but also the previous governments before it. And all I would urge is, yes, we need to move away from our, if you like, militarized, because you are bound to have residues of military rule. We were under military rule for a long time, so there's no pretense about that. All right. Some of these things, we need to demilitarize our mind first. Okay. It's not just by demilitarizing our constitution and demilitarizing other levers of government.
Dr. Fayemi, let me bring in Chief Momodu. Are we on the right track on the kind of democratic structure that we should be living as a country 20 years after?
Well, I believe Nigeria has actually deteriorated. And one of the reasons I would say that is the issue of even elections. 20-something years ago, we were able to conduct free and fair elections. Today, it has become almost impossible to conduct elections without making it seem as if we're in a state of war. And I'm sure Dr. Fayemi will agree with me on that, that the elections we have today are far worse than what we had in the past. And I am hoping that their government, I'll continue to say it, that their government will do something about this, because in 2015, we were all very excited when President Jonathan picked that phone and called the president-elect Buhari. But this time around, the over-militarization of the election gave cause for alarm. And everywhere we go in the world, I mean, people ask us what is going on in Nigeria. And I'm happy that we have people who have been in pro-democracy now in power. I know the challenges they may face. In every government, there is what Nigerians like to call the cabal, but we just must all come together and make sure that Nigeria, because I remember in 2009, I was in South Africa to see the then President Zuma. And I told him, oh, I'm planning to contest presidential election in 2011. And what he told me was simple. He said, oh, Nigeria is our big brother, that we are all waiting for Nigeria to get it right. Because once Nigeria gets it right, the whole of Africa will get it right. And if you interact with a lot of African leaders, they have so much respect for us. So anytime there is bad news coming out of Nigeria, they feel depressed because they know it will have some effect on their own countries. And I will encourage President Buhari that no matter what happens, even if some of us criticize him, he should take it in good faith, because only a madman will not recognize if something good is being done. And all he has to do, he will get all the credit for it.
Can you give any credit to President Buhari about his tendencies of trying to enshrine democratic values in Nigeria?
Oh, of course. I mean, he's tried his best. Maybe his best is not good enough.
But what would you like him to do?
I'm very particular about the issue of the unification of Nigeria. A lot of Nigerians today, trust me, believe that the man is just interested in his part of the country. That it may be a
Well,
perception.
is that true?
Oh, well,
Or just a perception?
I have no reason to doubt them because some of the actions taken by his government tend to portray that. So I'm hoping that in this second term, he will be able to address that. Let everybody have a sense of belonging. Those who are clamoring for, we want federalism, we want the restructuring. The reason they are grumbling is simply because they are not happy with the present configuration of Nigeria. And it's very difficult to just tell people to ignore those things. If you feel that you are being discriminated against anywhere in the world, there are Nigerians who were born in America who are complaining about President Trump. So how much more Nigerians born in Nigeria who feel oppressed in their own country? So we must make that extra effort. We shouldn't just dismiss it. That is one. Two, I believe that the issue of security has become a major concern for most people. I have friends who were going to Ekiti for a funeral this weekend. And you will not believe it. Some people are looking for soldiers to accompany them to go to Ekiti. It never used to be like that. So, and then anywhere in the world, if 10 dogs should die in a country, the country, you will feel the tremor. In Nigeria, people die aimlessly today and nobody talks. I want the president to talk to his people. I want the president to visit his people. Let him do that. If we can do it during the campaigns, why can't we do it after election? That is why Nigerians voted for him. We supported him because we felt a military man would be able to take care of security. I don't expect him to know much about the economy. I mean, the office of the vice president can take care of that. But the issue of security, we have no excuse. When they said they needed $1 billion, it was approved. They need this, they give it to them. So I will encourage him that the best thing he can do for himself and for his government this time around is to unite Nigerians. Let him not see any part of Nigeria as being antagonistic to him.
Okay, Dr. Fayemi, I see that you have been willing to coming into the conversation, and these are the issues. A lot of on the minds of Nigerians is how we can better this democratic practice. People like Chief Dele Momodu will not agree it's a democratic practice. They will say it's a civilian rule. But how do we make it better? You are in government. You are one of the leading governors. What do we need to do urgently?
Thank you very much. Dele is a patriotic Nigerian and he speaks his mind freely. The fact that Dele can speak his mind the way he does and the way he writes on his back page column in This Day every Saturday is a statement about where this country is. He knew that he couldn't do that years ago. I'm not harking back to those days in order to justify whatever is happening now. I agree with him that there are a number of things that we need to get right. Security is clearly one of them. And that was why governors had a special session with the president not quite a week ago, because all of us are concerned, all of us are bothered, and we think we need to take very drastic measures in order to arrest this descent into insecurity in a number of areas in our country. But to then suggest that the elections held in Nigeria in 2003 or in 1999 are better than the elections held now. Dele, I was a victim in the 2007 election. I know what happened. I also had an election in 2014 that I lost. I knew how I lost that election. But I did not hesitate from calling the winner of that election immediately that happened and inviting him over to discuss transition program. So it wasn't President Jonathan who first did what you referred to. I think it's why it's important to also take note of our history. But getting to the substance of your argument that President Buhari has a military background, he ought to do more for security. He has done more for security. Abuja is not being invaded now. the way it was in the past. But there are other forms of insecurity issues that we're grappling with. Banditry, you said some of your friends are going into it. But there is also an element of panic and hysteria. But that's not a problem, because when people are concerned, when they're worried, they do tend to exaggerate the fear of crime more than crime itself. And I think naturally, we shouldn't be surprised that Nigerians are reacting the way they are. But the president is listening. I would like to think that members of the government are also listening to this. There are steps to be taken about the structure and institutions responsible for our security, and they need urgent review. I agree with you. But this is a legacy tenure for the president. And I'm sure all of those issues you've raised, Dele, are also things that Mr. President must be looking at this point in time, and that we as governors are also looking at and putting across to him, coming from our various constituencies in the country. We are the ones whose citizens are experiencing these things directly on the ground. And the president is agitated about it. I've had a few private sessions with him, and I know how agitated he is, that security is not at a point that he would like it to be.
Let me ask you, now that, I mean, you're a governor, let's get a benefit that you are here. This issue of state police, and how much or how urgently do you think this can be effected? Do we see it happening anytime soon? Because it does look like that's one thing that we need urgently, is it?
You know, Sheung, state police, or whatever you may call it, multi-level policing or state policing, is not a silver bullet. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution to all of our security challenges. Yes, we do need a security system that allows those in charge to be accountable at the local level. There's no question about that. And I don't know, I've said this publicly, I'm on record for saying I don't know any federal state in the world, India, Canada, America, Nigeria, I mean, very many, Australia. I don't know any of them that has a unitary policing structure. They all have multi-level policing, right down to university campus policing. And having a state police is not tantamount to doing away with a federal police. It's about jurisdictions. And state police would handle what is within their state. Federal police would handle what is within the federal. In India, where we have this, they undergo the same training, but they operate in different states.
All right.
And I think that is why those of us who are promoters of multi-level policing believe that it's one of the solutions we must adopt. But I am also mindful, as chairman of Governors Forum, to sound out my colleagues. And I know that I have colleagues who believe that state police is not necessarily an antidote in their own jurisdiction. It could even lead to potential and much more difficult problems to solve. My colleague from Kaduna State, Governor El Rufai, is unapologetic about stating to us in our meetings, and whenever he gets the chance to do so, that he doesn't believe state police will work in dealing with the unique security situation that he has in Kaduna State. So we need to study everything, and Mr. President has agreed with us that we must use the National Economic Council to look at the entire gamut of our security system and architecture and address it.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. We need to close this segment. It's been a fantastic time talking to you. Well, we cannot go without allowing Chief Momodu to give his closing thought on the program, just in a few seconds.
Well, I'm quite excited about what Dr. Fayemi has been saying about their government. And he is also a military expert who knows about security. So we are hoping that we allow him to use that. You see, the problem in Nigeria most times is that we have people with ideas. It's either they are not invited, or when they are invited, they are rendered redundant. So hopefully this second time around, President Buhari will do much better.
I must sincerely thank both of you. It's a rare opportunity to have both of you speaking about some of the issues we speak in the same room, or, well, in the same room in the sense of having you together on the same program on this very important day to Nigeria. Chief Dele Momodu, it's a pleasure having you and talking to you yet again. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Sharon.
Dr. Fayemi, it's so good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming on the program.